Welcome to Unexpected Points. Just Kevin Cole here. No Josh Hermsmeyer. Hermsmeyer is, I don't know what the guy's doing. He's a man of mystery. He's an international traveler. Actually, I don't know if he's an international traveler, but he's traveling. That's what I got. I got a one-word response, traveling. So he's not around, but that just means more time for me to spout off and pontificate here on what went on in the NFL Week 14 season, implications for Week 14 slate, I should say, not season, implications for how things will play out for the rest of the season, and some other things I see, floating out there in the ether. I like to check in to see what's going on at different media sites, where the stories might be right now. I mean, I'm not going to dig into anything. I'm not going to dig into anything too narrative based. I mean, for instance, I'm looking here at ESPN. It says how Drake May's leadership has given Patriots hope for the future. Not going to get into leadership. Might get into his play, things like that. Not going to get into leadership, but there's some other interesting nuggets that are going around that I want to check out. Might as well give the plug right up here up top. Of course, Unexpected Points. Check it out. It's my Substack that has all of the different information. Of course, I just came out with the power rankings for this week. I'll talk about my power rankings versus what you may be seeing in the media a little bit here. The review of Cowboys Bengals from last night, the review of Sunday Night Football, and then, of course, if you look in the game reviews, I think this is probably the most valuable stuff you're finding here on a game-by-game basis, and it goes through the late and the early window to give you all the different scores. There's not a huge difference here between the adjusted scores and the actual scores in a lot of these different games this week. It's not like we've seen in some other weeks where there have been some pretty deceiving scores. One of them that's actually kind of interesting. So the one game that's interesting, and I don't know if I even trust my model on this one, is Minnesota-Atlanta. But this happened a few times with the Falcons recently, that, of course, it was a 21-point win, largely based on a lot of turnovers, a lot of third and fourth down conversions, some blown coverages down the field, and a special team / penalty advantage for the Vikings in this game. I actually had the Falcons. It shows the adjusted score showed the Falcons being 1 point better. Okay, I don't know if I believe that. But they did have a better offensive success rate. That was part of it. But they ran the ball so much that, actually, they ran the ball better than they threw it because of the turnovers. So they actually had decent efficiency, really strong success rates. I mean, they had a 53% success rate passing the ball, a 55% success rate rushing the ball. Those are really, really good numbers. But the Vikings had the big plays in the game and so on and so forth. I'm not gonna say that I believe that the Falcons were actually better, but I do think it contributes to maybe an accumulation of evidence that while the Vikings are really, really good, one of the top tier teams, as I'll show in my power rankings after this week going forward, maybe not quite as good as their record. And that's also reflected in my power rankings, which some people may dispute, especially when it comes to their ranking vis-a-vis the Green Bay Packers, which is extremely close, but it leans towards the Packers, at least according to my numbers. So I'll get into all that stuff, but I'll go ahead and check out unexpectedpoints.com for the research there. I appreciate everyone's support. Got some big upticks this season in subscriptions and support and all that stuff. So I appreciate that from everyone. All right, let's talk some stuff for this week. I want to first start with Bryce Young and his performance. Now, maybe it's only because I follow Panthers fan Josh Norris on Twitter, and he's pretty excited about everything. Shout out to Josh. He's a mock draft master for NFL mock drafts. So he's really high. I don't know if he's high on Bryce Young, but he's talking about it a lot, how good he was. Or how good he's been playing in recent weeks. I saw Mike Renner, PFF Mike, who I think we talked about last week, unfortunately disputing kind of what he said, but we love Mike here. old PFF colleague of mine who's been on this podcast. I think he might actually have the most popular, at least on YouTube, podcast that I've done leading up to the draft a couple of years ago, maybe just this year. He basically had said, okay, he was taking mea culpa on his draft evaluation of Bryce Young being very positive. So after he was so bad as a rookie and bad to start the season, he was saying, okay, I was wrong. Now he's back to saying, well, maybe I wasn't wrong. Maybe I wasn't wrong about Bryce Young. So let's try and figure this out. Let's try and figure this out. What's going on with Bryce Young this year? Now, I think the most important thing, and this is going to come down to where the numbers nerd contingent differs from others. But I don't think it's just like a numbers thing. I think it's who studies predictiveness, who's trying to really, get that signal from the noise, basically. Who's trying to separate what feels good narrative wise versus what's actually going to tell us what's going to happen in the future. I think in a way you can say it's getting closer to what the truth of the situation is. But, when you put labels like that onto things, people can dispute a bit. And I'm sure, a nerd like me who I'm only watching the NFL games like Clockwork Orange, where the eyes are being peeled back and you're forcing me to watch these NFL games versus the film guys who are digging into the all 22. The moment they're just refreshing until the moment that it's up there and ready to go and checking out all three. Both angles of the all 22 for every single play without commentary, just listening in silence. Maybe they have music on in the background, I hope. Although that may distract them from the mission at hand. But I think you get a better estimation of what actually happened. Is it always true? No, it's not always true. But if you can sort into which instances you can pick out the outliers, if you can decide and pick out the outliers in advance, then, hats off to you. I haven't really seen a lot of people who've been able to do that just based upon going with kind of their gut-based analysis on a lot of these things. Okay, so that was a long lead up to the main conclusion here, or the main piece of knowledge, the main heuristic, maybe if you want to say, for making decision-making heuristic when you're trying to predict who a player is going to be in the future if they're a young player in particular. Okay? The big picture thing is this mostly applies to the rookie year, but we can apply this also to second year. Looking within a season, not multiple seasons, looking within a season. If you try and predict future performance, and in this case, let's say it's Bryce Young. In this case, it would be future efficiency, so EPA per play. I know it's a team stat, whatever. It's the plays they're involved in. It's better than any other passing stat you're going to get on anything. This would also apply to PFF grading if you like that a little bit better. Everyone can have their opinion on what they like or not from those different stats. But if we're talking about predicting these stats into the future, second half of season stats are not any better at predicting what will happen into the future than full season stats. So they are ever so slightly better, not a lot better. They're ever so slightly better than first half of the season stats, right? So there is something to that. Like if I was going to predict who Bryce Young is going to be, and maybe we should even get to the background of this here before I get into all the different stuff. So if we're looking at like EPA per play by week for Bryce Young, obviously god awful as a rookie, but sometimes guys can be bad as rookies and still do well, although it matters. Definitely matters. If we're looking at the 2024 numbers, I'm sorting my data here. If we look at the 2024 numbers, let's look at total EPA per game because it'd be an easy way to discuss it. So it's total expected points added in the different games throughout the season, right? So he played weeks 1, 2, 5, 8, and then 8 through 14. So it was 1, 2, 5. He got in there for a little bit as a backup. So he was benched after the second week, right? 5, he got in a few plays, and then 8 through 14. So if you look what happened these first few weeks, This is what the stuff that people want to write off, because not only was it bad, but it was, tremendously bad. The total EPA in these weeks, it was negative 13.5 in week 1 and negative 23.5 in week 2. Now, just for some context here, like how bad were those games? Well, in total EPA lost, that week 2 game, so the 23.5 was the second worst game of the season, the second most negative EPA game of the NFL season amongst, what do we have here? 445 entries into here. The worst, Spencer Rattler, week 7 against the Denver Broncos. The third worst, so bracketing Young here, we have Daniel Jones against the Minnesota Vikings. After that, Deshaun Watson. We have a Gardner Minshew game. We got Caleb Williams. Shout out to Caleb there. Caleb's a good example, right? Like the randomness of when the games are good and when the games are bad. He was bad, then he turned things around, and now he's bad again. So again, timing can be pretty random here. So Young had one of the worst games, the second worst game of the season in total EPA in week 2. And then if you look at his total EPA in week 1, it was in the bottom 10%, pretty easily in the bottom 10th percentile when it came to negative efficiency in those 2 games, right? So, okay. So we have that. Now, after he came back from being benched, things have gotten better, obviously. The Panthers have been in games, things have been closer. At the same point in time, the upside has not necessarily been there. Okay. So the problem is when you have extremely negative games to start the season, you have some middling games in the middle. You take the first couple of games when he came back to start again, it was negative 6.4 EPA in week 8. So, bad, but not god awful. It was positive 3.8 EPA in week 9. So it's kind of very mediocre numbers when you consider the fact that passing plays are generally positive EPA. And then negative 1.4 EPA in week 10. Now, the last 3 weeks, they've all been positive. 10.2 EPA is best game of the year against the Chiefs, 6.8 and 4.0. But even then, even these games, the Chiefs game, it tops out at about a quarter of an EPA per play. And that would rank, if you just took that rank on the season, it would rank right around top 10-ish. But again, that's his high mark. So his high water mark. So we're talking about because you kind of want to know, can these guys become top 10 quarterbacks in the future, right? It's kind of what we're concerned at. So that type of number, well, actually, it's more like top 5, but still, it's in that kind of, it's between, 4, 5, and 6, that sort of number. His best game would get you to 5th overall. Best game that he's had of any game. It's not, for all these other guys who were in the top 10 in EPA per play, their best game would be well above the season leader, because you're mixing the good and the bad into those numbers together. So Young's best game, it's only one game, would get into that top 5 sort of range. When you go to his second best game, which was 0.13 EPA per play, not this last week, which is only 0.09, but the week before, and then you compare that to seasonal sorts of things, well, that's already taking him out of the top 15. So his second best game of the season is not even an above average game for seasonal numbers for these guys who are mixing good and bad together, right? It's worse than Derek Carr's seasonal number for context, if you want to think about that. What Derek Carr has done, again, being up and down all season long, and no one's raving about what Derek Carr is doing. That's Young's second best game of the season. And then the 0.09 EPA, that's almost a blowout. It's just a below average game, kind of period, for a quarterback. I mean, well, whatever. It's maybe average or maybe slightly above average now that I think about it. But still not good, right? I know he doesn't have great circumstances. I know that the blocking may not be great. The receivers, obviously, there's a big drop there in this Philly game at the end that we all saw that would have ended up being a touchdown, would have been a big EPA gain, would have boosted things up. Don't get me wrong. But, if you start picking and choosing all these little things, you can start to get you can boost up any quarterback somewhat, or you can drop down any quarterback if you start to focus on these things. And I think the key is you acknowledge the poor context and you say, okay, even with the poor context, would you want things to be better than what they are here? Like, would you hope that things would be better? Would you hope that the second best game he's had this year was better than a middling average for a quarterback on the season? Yeah, you'd hope for that, even if you have poor circumstance, even if you have poor surroundings. Because the people were like, okay, maybe Bryce Young will end up being it. Maybe he will end up being the guy. The more predictive full season numbers for Bryce Young still have him, if you're looking at every quarterback who has at least 200 dropbacks this year, okay? If you're amongst that subset of quarterbacks with 200 dropbacks or more, 33 different quarterbacks fit that bill. Bryce Young is the fourth worst in EPA per play for his seasonal number. And again, the seasonal number is more predictive than a half-season split. Whether you look at rookies, because this happens all the time with rookies, right? Where guys get hot at the end of the season, and then people declare them as like, oh, let's just wipe off the board everything that happened in the first half of the season. We've seen this a little bit with Bo Nix, and Bo Nix is another guy to think about in this classification. We've seen that a little bit with Bo Nix versus Jaden Daniels. Everyone's like, just forget about what happened the first 8-9 weeks of the season. The Broncos have a great record. They won some of those games despite Bo Nix not playing well. Jaden Daniels is vastly better in the seasonal numbers, but if you only look at the last handful of weeks, then they're pretty close. No. You can't do that stuff. Okay? At the bottom of the NFL with at least 200 dropbacks, we have Deshaun Watson, who may never play another NFL snap. We have Will Levis, who it would be beyond shocking if he was a starting quarterback in 2025. I mean, through injury, maybe. You have Gardner Minshew, who, again, shocking if he's a starting quarterback going into 2025. Let's hope Vegas got something going on there. Hope they got Dion's kid coming in, who's doing a big campaign to try to get over there. So you got those three, and then you got Bryce Young. And then above Bryce Young, you have Daniel Jones. So Daniel Jones has been better so far this season. I mean, over the course of the whole season in efficiency. So, my perception of Young is certainly gone up versus how I viewed him after his rookie year. After his rookie year, it was like, okay, there's no chance that he could. Not no chance. There's a smaller chance that he could even be like a starting quarterback in the NFL, let alone an elite quarterback. But if anything, what we've seen this season, while it may give you some more confidence he could start in the NFL, maybe like an Alex Smith sort of career arc being the upside here that we're talking about. If anything, what's happened this season probably adds to the evidence that he's not going to be that elite quarterback. So in some ways, if you're hyper focused on, getting a guy who has a top 10, who could be a consistent top 10 efficiency quarterback, the guys who really move the needle when it comes to performance and play and all those sorts of things. If anything, what Young has done this year, why some people are taking it as a positive, is a negative for that specific question, in my opinion. Being bottom 4 in efficiency this year. It's not good. He doesn't have as high of a sample as some other guys because he missed some games. So, you take that into context, but, getting benched isn't exactly great. Like, the reason for it isn't exactly great, but it depends on, again, what your target is, what your goal is. If your goal is this guy is our franchise quarterback who's going to lead us deep in the playoffs, bad. Haven't seen enough from Bryce Young. Hasn't changed that opinion. If anything, maybe it's even locked in that opinion a little bit more. this much improvement is not enough to really help. Even Josh Allen had more improvement than this in year 1, too. And of course, he brings the physical traits, which kind of hold out more hope than what Bryce Young has. But if your goal is, can we build an awesome team around this guy and win and make the playoffs and probably get eliminated after, in the divisional round or something like that, as topping out in the divisional round, yeah, you might fit into that bucket. The probability of that has probably gone up this year versus last year. But it's all how you sort out those two different things. So again, I would look at that with Bo Nix also, who I think has been actually legitimately pretty good by the numbers the last several weeks, with a pretty good supporting cast and all that, but still nowhere close to Jaden Daniels. So just think about those two things. Like Jaden Daniels is still head and shoulders above the rest of the pack. And that's why he should be offensive rookie year and all that stuff. And in the same vein, maybe we could talk about this Sam Darnold propaganda. Is an interesting comment here from Kieran. So Sam Darnold is actually one of the guys who I believe played really well. I think it was there was these stats of, highest PFF passing grade last 5 weeks of his rookie season in the NFL versus anyone else. Things like that. I think he might have even done it in his second year too. And then when he went to Carolina, he was really good at the beginning and then fell off a cliff after that. Darnold is a really interesting question going forward because we're not looking at seasonal splits here. We're looking at a new level of performance where by my adjusted numbers, he's like in the top 5, that sort of number. Now, by the overall numbers, he's outside of the top 10. So if you look at the overall efficiency numbers on Darnold, I think this is good context when you're thinking about, I saw someone saying it would be like an all-time fumbling the bag type of moment if the Vikings decided to move on from Sam Darnold next year, if he's leading them to this type of season this year. I disagree, primarily because it's still one season of top play. And we have seen guys have one season of better play mixed in with poor seasons before, where most of the time it doesn't turn around where it's this far into their career. It's possible. It's possible. But I think, my adjusted numbers have them much higher. But I think the Vikings defense has also been really, really good this year. So that's when the record comes into play a little bit on this. And again, if you're going to look at him by straight EPA per play this year, throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson, throwing the ball to Jordan Addison, who seems to be, making the leap and looks like a pretty solid guy there. Probably getting some schematic help in a way, potentially from Kevin O'Connell. Seems to be a pretty smart guy, what he's doing over there. If you look at where Sam Darnold is ranked for this year and how people might think about him going forward, he's actually slightly below Baker Mayfield. Now, Baker Mayfield has got a lot of yak help that Darnold hasn't gotten. Looks a lot worse by the adjusted numbers, but just giving you the straight EPA per play. He's a little bit, he's ranked right below Baker Mayfield. Now Baker Mayfield has more of a track record because he wasn't benched for as long, but these guys were drafted the same year, and Sam Darnold has a lot of a track record in those first few seasons where he was starting. So it's not dramatically different. It's not like we should look at Sam Darnold's breakout versus Baker Mayfield now over the last couple of seasons has been pretty good. I mean, who would you rather have going forward, Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield? I don't know. The way some people are talking now, it's almost as if it's Sam Darnold first. And I think we have more evidence that Baker Mayfield will actually perform better going forward than Darnold. Right below Sam Darnold, on a much lower sample size, so that there's that caveat there, is Russell Wilson. Right below that, and again on a smaller sample size, but not that much smaller for sample size, is Derek Carr. So even if you look at this one season for Darnold, this is not a 2020 Josh Allen breakout type of season for Sam Darnold. Okay, this is not, remember Allen 2020, he was second team All-Pro. Aaron Rodgers was the MVP. Josh Allen was the next best quarterback in the NFL. We're not talking about that type of breakout for Darnold here. We're talking about a breakout where the guy immediately ahead of him was given up on by his first team, went to a second team on a small deal, got one of these kind of mid-sized QB contracts, which are pretty rare for Mayfield. We have a guy, Russell Wilson, who was just, cut and signed for the league minimum. I mean, there's no reason to sign him for more because of the way the contracts work, but still, was cut and thrown out to his team. And we have Derek Carr, who again, the Raiders sat him down, moved on from him a couple of years ago, and he got a pretty good free agent contract with the Saints. But that's where Darnold's falling in right here. So, like, I don't know. He could potentially have even more upside than this, but he's pretty much seems to be falling into this like amorphous, shifting mid-tier quarterback type of projection that you can figure out for him. Like the Geno Smith. Remember, Geno Smith didn't get that big of a deal either going forward. He had his leap, but it wasn't a leap up until like a top 5 quarterback by any means. It wasn't really a leap into being a top 10 quarterback. I know what the NFL hipsters say on here, but I don't understand what the NFL hipsters are saying. Geno Smith, for instance, Geno Smith this year has a lower EPA per play than Kirk Cousins. Okay. Only slightly higher than Trevor Lawrence. I never get the film hipsters on Geno. I know he throws a beautiful ball, but Geno's upside is capped. So that mid-tier, like you can start this guy, you can win with good surroundings guy, that's Sam Darnold. So to say it would be some sort of all-time fumble to let him go, I guess I just don't see it that way. It's a risk. It's a risk that McCarthy comes in and busts, and then you had this great season, and now you don't have anything going forward. But it's probably a risk that's no more than moving on from Kirk Cousins or someone like that. Probably even less so since Cousins had more of an established track record. But of course, Cousins also had the age and injury stuff. But somebody may pay Darnold. Someone may pay him a lot. Guys, there's still NFL executives who had Darnold way up there on their draft board, above Baker Mayfield for sure. I think he was above Baker Mayfield on most draft boards. I think he would have been the number 1 pick if a lot of teams had the number 1 pick that year and not the Browns, or the number 2 pick if a lot of teams weren't the Giants and drafting Saquon. He was that guy. So seeing these flashes, it was probably going to motivate. He'll probably get a huge contract. So that's another thing for the Vikings. I don't know what the Vikings free agency situation is going to be next year, but lower down to that rookie contract, not have the big contract for Darnold, and probably notch easily a 3rd round, the best you can get compensatory pick for Sam Darnold. I think that's the way to go. That's the way to go if you want to win some championships. If you want to make the playoffs next year, it might not be the way to go in 2025. If you want to have the highest likelihood of making the playoffs, it may not be the way to go, but it's not the way that I roll. Not the way that I would roll. So again, Darnold kind of fits into this sort of category, but instead of looking at half seasons versus half seasons, we still got to look at multiple seasons. Now, if Darnold gets like 2 seasons, 3 seasons where he's playing like this, yeah, I would slot him in and saying, okay, this could be the guy. The only reason we could be a little bit more confident about Josh Allen after 1 season in 2020 was because of just how good he was. How good he was at that point. But just think generally, every time that you're splitting a sample, even if you're using more recent information, which is going to be more useful for projections. I mean, in my Bayesian quarterback projections, they decay over time, the technical decaying over time. So the older evidence is less valuable, has less weighting than the newer evidence. It's still bad to ignore evidence, except for rare circumstance. I mean, maybe like if you're projecting Josh Allen now, I would use 2022 through today to project him going forward, more so than really counting in the 2018 and 2019. But it's about clearly delineating when someone makes that leap. Normally it's after a rookie year that you can kind of ignore the rookie year a little bit more going forward. Sometimes it's after the 2nd year, like Josh Allen. Does it ever happen further? Not too often. So I'm going to decay heavily the old Darnold information, but it doesn't go away. So when you have a outside the top 10-ish sort of performance this year, right in that range, plus bad decayed information. So now I'm thinking, okay, maybe we can project him to be average-ish, slightly below average type of guy. I don't think it's a huge fumble to let that guy go forward. And again, even this year, you could say it's great. It's moving up our projection on him a lot, but it's not moving up our projection of him being elite quarterback, right? He's not doing that. So you're not giving up that, even when a lot of things are coming together for Darnold. And that's something that's important in how you look at it. Okay. One other thing I want to talk about. I'll talk about one other thing, and then I'll start to get to the Q&A, because I just like to have a few things here and then let you guys drive the conversation here. So, power rankings. We got to talk about these power rankings. If you look at now, I know most of this is done for like engagement, the power rankings, but it still shocks me a little bit, like how bad media power rankings are. I was looking at this ESPN power rankings because, well, first of all, I put out my own power rankings and everyone's yelling at me because they'll say, how can you possibly have a team that's this record above a team that's that record? So I wanted to just take a quick look to see, okay, like how much is the media still going on record when it comes to these things? Because I make jokes that all they do is just descending sort wins, and then that put out their power ranking. So I looked, and it's almost like I can't imagine it being even any more based upon records than this ESPN power rankings. So you go down, Lions are number 1. That's fine. I got the Lions at number 1. Kansas City number 2. Now, so they're going 12-1, 12-1. Kansas City is falling on mine, despite winning. Has been falling the last couple of weeks. Because barely beating teams that aren't that good, it doesn't help your power rankings. Doesn't help you show that you're an elite team. Kansas City has actually fallen all the way down to 7th in my power rankings. I don't know if I actually believe that they're 7th. I probably put them more like 5th, but the numbers have been bad. But again, so these media ones, they have Kansas City at number 2. Eagles at number 3. I'm actually pretty much aligned with that. But again, it's going straight on record, right? 12 wins down to 11 wins. They're the 11 win team. And now we go down. There's 2 11 win teams, excuse me. But now the one difference here, people, they have the Buffalo Bills above the Minnesota Vikings, despite the fact that Buffalo has one more loss, one fewer win, or one less win. Excuse me. I always get that wrong. You're supposed to say fewer, but if it's one, you say less. I don't know. It confuses me sometimes. So the fact that they lost in the shootout for the Buffalo Bills, they only dropped them 2 spots here in the rankings. They moved Minnesota up 6 spots. Like these are big movements near the top of the rankings when they beat the Falcons again. My numbers are Buffalo still at number 2 for me. And again, it's because they did have a really, really good game offensively, which matters more for me than defense. And the Vikings are number 6. So it's all pretty close. But as you go further and further down, again, look at it. It's just straight record. So he's got another 10-win team, 10-3 Steelers, 9-4 Packers, 8-5 Ravens, 8-5, 8-5, 8-5, 8-5. All the teams in a row, every single 8-5 team. They just have all the 8-5 teams, and then they sort amongst them. 8-5 for the Seahawks, and then 7-6, 7-6. 6-7, 6-7, 6-7, 6-7. Look, they got the 49ers down here at 18th. So they have the 49ers power ranked with the Miami Dolphins. Actually, the Dolphins are pretty good too. This is another team that should be much higher. So you got the Dolphins ranked according to their record, even though they were missing Tua for all those games. You got them thrown in here with the Falcons and the Colts. Come on, people. 5-8 Bengals, who I have the Bengals really high because their offense continues to be so good. Maybe a little too high on them, but I have them like on the top 10. And then Saints, Cowboys, and the one other change is they do have the 3-10 Browns above the 4-9 Bears. I mean, can make some sense here because the fact that the switch over to Winston, they've been a little bit better since then. But that's it. They only have 2 instances on here of having a team with fewer wins above a team with more wins. 2. And, we watch these games, right? We're watching the witching hour on NFL Red Zone. We see how a couple of plays go one way versus go another way, and you get a whole different result in these games. So, what are we doing here with these power rankings? Do people not understand what power rankings are supposed to do? They're supposed to tell you how good a team is going to be going forward. I know this is kind of like a pedantic rant here, but it is amazing to me how bad this sort of stuff can be. And record not only influences these power rankings, but I also think record influences some perception of offenses, because that's kind of what's front of mind. Offenses, quarterbacks, and what teams are doing this year versus what teams are doing in other years. What I want to point out in that regard is when I put out offensive and defensive rankings by EPA per play this this week, it reminded me how in the Saquon Barkley should be MVP discourse, how one of the points that I saw a couple different people say, a couple different commentators say was, well, the offense is obviously better this year, a lot better, significantly better. Well, not just better, significantly better. And Saquon's a big part of that. Well, the problem is, if you look at the Phillies offense, even coming off of a kind of a bad game last week, it's 0.11 EPA, and they were basically 0.10 EPA for the entire season last year. They're ranked fifth in the NFL right now, but virtually tied with the two teams below them. So, they could almost go down to seventh pretty easily. And they were ranked seventh last year. So it's almost the same exact performance. But again, their defense has gone up tremendously, and that's what affects our perception on there. If you look at their defense year over year, they now have the seventh best defense in the NFL by EPA per play, where they were 29th last year. Okay? So the fourth worst last year, seventh best this year. The other two teams that I'll warn people about when we're discussing, offenses, weapons, quarterbacks, maybe offensive coordinators in this regard, Seahawks are another one. Seahawks are leading the NFC West, a poor NFC West, at least according to record. No, not really poor, though, according to team talent. Like, they do have some talent in there with the 49ers and the Rams and the Cardinals. But that's another one where people might say, oh, they got rid of Shane Waldron, who was messing everything up last year. Now their offense is playing better. Again, I mentioned how Geno is top, outside of the top 20 almost in EPA per play. Like, he's not performing that well by the results on the field, whatever context you want to throw around it for him. They're another team where there's probably a feeling that their offense has gotten better this year. There's probably this idea of like, oh yeah, things are going so much better than when their offense was a little bit clunky last year and now is maybe a little bit better this year. Well, you know what? 17th in the NFL in offensive EPA per play this year, 10th last year. So their offense has actually gotten worse. I remember everyone hated Shane Waldron. Everyone hated all that stuff. Thank God we don't have him anymore. Well, you might be winning more games, but your offense isn't actually any better than it was before. The difference is that your defense, and this is maybe we can give some credit to your coach, McDonald, coming in. The defense is up to 9th best by EPA per play, whereas last year they were 30th, so third worst. That's another one where I think people are throwing that off. The last one I'll mention, this goes back to the Bo Nix thing, and again, you can chop it up by first half of the season versus what's happening in the second half of the season and this and that, but still, full season is the most important thing. If you look at the full season numbers for the Broncos, offensive efficiency, they're 19th this year. They were 20th for all of 2023. No difference, basically, in rank ordering. Slight improvement in actual EPA efficiency. But this year, they have a worse offensive efficiency than the Jets. Okay? Right? Worse offensive efficiency than the Jets this year on a per-play basis by EPA. The Broncos, who everyone's like, oh, Bo Nix has revitalized the team, versus Russell Wilson was so horrible last year. Maybe not. Maybe the defense is playing better. Maybe they're getting some breaks. Maybe the way the scores are matching up. They just happen to be scoring just enough points in the games they need it. And then, taking larger losses in games where they don't need it. But the reality is, again, it is a defensive jump here, which is less stable. Remember, it's less stable for the Broncos, who are number one this year. Number one. Numero uno. Now, with schedule adjustments, that they're not number one anymore, but still, numero uno in having the worst opponent EPA per play. So the worst, against opposing offense EPA per play, where they were 25th last year. Hey, just think about it a little bit. Think about the way we think about these teams. When quarterbacks get chances to win, I remember seeing this at Justin Fields at the end of last year, where it was like he's learning how to win. Well, I mean, he was kind of put in a lot more circumstances where he could potentially win at the end of games in the second half of last year because the defense was playing so well. Same is the case for Bo Nix to some degree, although again, he has been getting better. Same is the case for Geno Smith this year. Same is the case for Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense, even though I know the rumbling this week is maybe things aren't so happy in the locker room there for the Eagles offense, but roughly about the same as they've done before. But when this defense starts jumping up and down, people ignore that a little bit too much, at least causally for what's going to happen. It's not very predictive, but it is important for causally telling us what has happened. All right, let's get to some questions here. And then we can figure out. Okay, from Camden Caps here, Q&A. Have you read any Herbert Simon's organizational theory, and would there be any sites useful to NFL teams for how to structure their organization better to make better decisions? Nope, I have not read any of that. Seeing the news recently, I wonder if our healthcare assassin's probably read that. He's got a pretty extensive Goodreads list from what I've seen. But I would say that, and I talked about this a little bit into how teams should be structuring things. Like you kind of almost need a layer between owner and GM coach when you have like the GM coach are just directly tied to the most recent performance, whether they're going to get fired or not, and then not having an additional layer between them and the owner to help evaluate what's going on and have some continuity of what's going on. So I think that could be something where you could add into the NFL. But just generally, I think I'd add a lot more capacity behind the scenes because you're not constrained by salary cap, and it's going to make a bigger difference. Definitely would add more to the analytics teams and things like that. But no, I haven't read too much about the organizational theory. But these NFL teams are just run like shit shows anyway, just versus any sort of company. Now, I don't know if you want to make it like a Fortune 500 company, how you're running these things, but I do think having a CEO type who isn't going to have to fall on his sword every 2-3 years, depending upon what the results are, having that between the owner and the head coach and the GM would probably be the number one thing that I would try to implement for teams going forward. Another question from Camden here. Would it be worth it for the Chiefs to trade up for a tackle in the draft while they have Mahomes? If yes, what would be your price? Well, it's really hard to tackle would be the next closest position to quarterback when it comes to needing to be in the top half or mid to top half of the first round in order to get talent. So I agree that it's tough with the Chiefs consistently drafting at the bottom half of the first round. The problem is getting up from that bottom half of the first round to the middle, even the middle of the first round, could be quite expensive. We've seen some teams do it. The Jets did something, where they moved up not even that many spots to get a guard in Elijah Vera Tucker, and it cost them a boatload. The problem is if you're drafting into the area where you have these like blue chip type of players that are still on teams' boards, the ransom to do it is really hard. So it would be my intuition that no, they should not do it, that it's not worth it, and that having additional shots at finding a tackle, because you do find good tackles further down. It's just harder than it is at other positions. I would go with volume over moving up from their position just because it would be too costly, I think, from that sort of position to move up when we're not talking about a quarterback here. And, they've had some bad luck. They've had some bad luck with guys that they picked up. I definitely wouldn't be spending a ton of money in free agency. We saw them do that. I think they could have spent less just to get a, mediocre above replacement level sort of talent in free agency would be kind of the bar where I would look for that. And then, try to take multiple shots in the draft to get a little bit higher than that. One man's odyssey here. No numbers to back it up, but I felt like Young was not being super accurate, and Leggett seemed to take more of the heat for it. I don't know. The way I watched it, you got to secure that thing. It was actually like he caught it and then he tried to tuck it and he lost it in that part. So no, I mean, I think I put that like receivers, you only got one job here, right? It's catching the ball. So you should be able to catch the ball when it's not, when you have to leap for it. Did he even have to leap for it? That's another question. I mean, I think part of it leaping forward is like you prevent someone else from getting in there and breaking it up more so. So yeah, I mean, if he could have just secured it slightly better, he's rolling into the end zone and that's a touchdown. But again, I'm not a film guy, so that's just my take. Even Thielen's heroics is another add-on to that. Have usually been catching unnecessarily inaccurate catches. Seems like Young has better decision making, but the accuracy still isn't there. Yeah, I mean the CPOE numbers, for what it's worth, for Young in these recent weeks, I mean it's not bad, but it's just kind of like meh, just kind of very flat. So yeah, I mean he's really improved a lot in not making negative plays. So he hasn't had like a big negative EPA game since week 8. Negatives, I mean INTs, sacks. He's only had one INT over these last 4 weeks. And he hasn't taken a lot of sacks. So again, when that's the improvement more than anything else, and that's important, right? Like it's important to raise that floor by not having those negatives. It's not really like being that much better throwing the ball. It's just you're going to extend more drives when you're not taking those negatives. Okay, I already did the. Oh wait, there's multiple here. Okay, there's put on here twice here the same questions. Nathan Toth here says Darnold signing that 1 year deal with Minnesota pushed himself to be better this season. It could have been possibly it for him being a starter had he not played to this level. Yeah, I don't know. People love Sam Darnold though, so I feel like he didn't have to quite be at this level, and he could have maybe like backdoored into a starting job, or at least you like the guy who's going to be replaced by the draft pick job, like the Tyrod Taylor role, where you just go. You're just like the name starter who gets replaced a week into the season, where that happened with him with Baker Mayfield and then with Justin Herbert. He probably could have done that one. So, dry defender. Are there more than 5 or 6 quarterbacks that we can be highly confident in going forward? That number feels a bit smaller now than it used to be. Well, the problem is when you say highly confident, it's like, what are we confident in, right? And that's when it comes to like the Young question. Like we can be more confident. Like there are guys who we can be highly confident, but not highly confident that they're elite, right? And I think that's what you're getting at here. There are guys we can be highly confident or like average. Baker Mayfield, we're getting more confident that, hey, this guy's like might be an average starting quarterback. He's not a guy you have to toss aside necessarily if you can build a good team around him. So we are like gaining confidence about some of these guys without thinking highly confident in being elite. And we've kind of lost some confidence, right? Where people had too much confidence on maybe your CJ Strouds going into this year. So the guys that I would be highly confident on going forward. Patrick Mahomes. I know he hasn't a great year, but Patrick Mahomes. Josh Allen, number 2. Josh Allen's number 2 for me, not Lamar Jackson. It's one of these weird things where this is another thing where you're thinking about how you're splitting up stats. Like because Allen made that leap, I know some people like to compare the career stats for Lamar Jackson against Josh Allen, but remember, like Jackson didn't even play that much and he was bad as a rookie. Allen was bad as a rookie, but he played the whole season. Jackson was obviously fantastic that second year versus Allen not being that good. But ever since the leap for Allen, I would lean towards him. So anyway, so Allen's the guy. But then, of course, Jackson's another guy. So we have Mahomes, Allen, Jackson, highly confident in. Burrow, yes, I'll put in there. But again, it's kind of like a teardrop after those other guys. So Burrow, I don't know. Herbert, I guess. I don't know. Highly confident. Yeah, can we be highly? Yeah, I mean, I still think Herbert is probably closer to Burrow than Burrow is to Jackson, Allen, and Mahomes. But it's kind of like Mahomes by himself, Allen, Jackson next, Burrow maybe by himself, and then a little mini tier maybe down to Herbert based upon what's happened this year. But other than that, you're right. I don't think we can be highly confident in anyone else other than those guys, probably. I'm just glancing through this stuff here. The guys who would be pretty close, probably need to see a little bit more from him. I mean, Purdy is getting pretty close in there. Love, if we see a little bit more from Love, I'm willing to put him into that sort of category. Jaden Daniels, I mean, if Jaden Daniels has a good second year, I mean, I'm already bumping him up in that category. He's close for me. A guy who has no history of bad performance is close to me. I think he's been better than Stroud was last year, better than Herbert was as a rookie, in my opinion, for how he looks this year. So those guys would be in the next category. And then we have Stroud, who can maybe, jump back up if he starts doing well. Lawrence could turn things around. There's some potential there for Lawrence turning things around. Jalen Hurts, like, solid. He just, like, you have confidence in him being really solid, especially with the rushing stuff in there, but maybe less confidence now than you had a couple of years ago of him being a top tier, real sort of guy in there. And then, you have the Staffords of the world who are can have these high end performances like we saw last week, who can kind of beat anyone, any game, but aren't going to give you the consistency week to week. You have the Kyler Murrays of the world who are probably just always going to have up and down seasons as they go forward. We're going to fall into the next kind of larger tier when we're looking at these guys. But that's kind of how I would think about them. On Jared Goff, I guess Jared Goff would be in that same category. Like, you surround him well, you can be. It's like you can be highly confident in Goff being good if you surround him well. So that's a different category. Same with Tua, I think. Tua and Goff, I think, are very similar in that regard. So that's how I would look at all those guys. KOC making Darnold and Kirk look like this makes me believe JJ is going to be the GOAT. I mean, I think KOC has done great, but I also don't like to overemphasize the coach. I mean, Kirk's looked pretty good with a lot of different circumstances. And even this year, I know coming off the Achilles, he's looked bad, but he's had some flashes. He's just too many turnovers. Corb here doesn't like my week 15 power rankings. Oh, Seahawks fan. I mean, I moved the Seahawks up 1, but I'm sorry. They just look kind of average-ish by the numbers. Okay. Another Q&A here. Do you think this is from Dry Defender. Do you think where a quarterback was drafted is accurately weighted in public perception? Near unanimous consensus that Stroud was greater than Purdy last offseason comes to mind for people being stuck on draft slot. No, I don't think it's accurately weighted in public perception, but I do think it matters after a single season, depending upon the level of the season. I do think it matters, when I looked at guys who were really bad as rookies, who ended up turning it around. And maybe there's some selection bias here because they got the chance to turn it around, whereas later round picks wouldn't have even gotten the chance to turn it around. But anyone who has done that, Stafford, Goff, Allen, if you're going even further back, Alex Smith, going even further back, Terry Bradshaw, if you want to go really, Troy Aikman, if you want to go really far back. It's all these like number 1 picks. Allen was number 7, I think, right? All guys were pretty high up there. So, maybe there's some selection bias that they were able to turn around, but I do think there's some signal there that we can get this upper outcome. I think it's off a bit once we get into 3-4 years. Although there is something attached to physical traits probably when it comes to the higher draft picks, which are going to show some sort of upside if other things click. So generally overweighted draft position, evaluation and perception, but it definitely matters. It definitely does matter. From Sam Birch here, the thing with Young, while lots of people are being too high on him despite the overall bad play from him, has something fundamentally changed. The new play has to be significantly better. Yeah, it is significantly better, but you're kind of coming off of a baseline of like horrible play. So that's part of it. Okay. Last one I'm going to look at here from Camden again. How much weight do you put on coaching versus surrounding talent with helping a quarterback like Darnold? Is it more Justin Jefferson making him better or KOC, or is it all just variance and luck? Well, it's definitely more Justin Jefferson than it is KOC, in my opinion. I think coaching narratives are really easy to come up with, but um, Justin Jefferson is probably the best receiver in the NFL. So, like, I'll take best receiver in the NFL every day of the week and twice on Sunday versus picking any coach in the NFL that you want. That's just what I'm doing. Just think the differential between that coach and a coach like, let's think about KOC, like he had no experience. We didn't know anything about him before he became a head coach as to how good he would be or not. And people are putting him up in that sort of range. He's looking like a strong contender for coach of the year this year. It's funny. In a way, I feel like people would be looking at him even more fondly if JJ McCarthy had gotten injured on like the first play of the season than getting injured in the preseason. People kind of forget that he is dealing with a backup for the entire season at quarterback there, right? So I think it's more surroundings than anything else, but coaching obviously matters too, which is really hard to measure it. And when it's hard to measure, then it's hard to predict. And when it's hard to predict, it's hard to be confident in. So I would lean talent first. Now, maybe if we're talking about like, do you want a particular center or guard or safety or some? Well, some safeties can be pretty good. Or inside linebacker versus a coach. Now I'm starting to get in a discussion that I'd be interested in. All right, everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be back at you. You know what? I'm going to come back on Friday. I'm going to do it. I'm going to put it down. I will come back on Friday to discuss Thursday night and then also discuss what's going on for the weekend and other news that we'll get throughout the week. And then I'll be back next Tuesday with or without Josh Hermsmeyer. Go to unexpectedpoints.com. Sign up for everything if you want to check out all of my different research. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your week. And I'll be back to talk to you on Friday. Thanks so much, guys.